Welcome everyone to the BIOFIN Webinar, Reducing Risks and Seizing Opportunities in Agrobiodiversity Finance. This is a very interesting webinar that will showcase an example of how to bring the private sector into one of the most relevant challenges we have related to agrobiodiversity and food security. And I would like to introduce our panelists today. We have Dr. Rosalind Remans. She's a research scientist with Biodiversity International and the Ghent University. Rosalind, she has been working in biodiversity in food systems for many years now. Biodiversity International is a global research organization, part of the consortium of CGIAR, and their objective is to safeguard agriculture and tree diversity. And I would also like to present Fred Warnick. Fred is a specialist in private investments and financial structuring. He has around 20 years of experience across various markets and financial products. He co-founded Claire Mondial in 2010, and this is they're based in Zurich. It's an independent advisory firm that focuses on sustainable investments, mainly in the agricultural sector in emerging markets. I'm sure we'll have very two interesting presentations. I would let you know also that we will have a Q&A section at the end of these presentations. You can write your question on the questions panels here in the GoToWebinar application, or just raise your hand also in the panel next to your name. So we would like to start with Rosalind. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mariana, and thank you everyone for being here. We are very excited to be talking and discussing with you today the Agrobiodiversity Index and how it can help to reduce risks and seizing opportunities with public and private partners. Before we start into detail, I would like, you might be wondering, what do they mean exactly with agrobiodiversity? And we want to refer here to the FAO definition, which is a variety of plants, animals, microorganisms, and ecosystems that contribute to our food and agriculture. Starting from that definition, we want to highlight that agrobiodiversity really sits at the nexus between biodiversity and food and agriculture systems. And we look at agrobiodiversity at different levels, at the ecosystem level, at the species level, and at the genetic level, and how different parts contribute to our food and agriculture ecosystems. Now, why should we care? As most of you know, we face multiple interconnected challenges in our food systems, in our daily life. We are challenged by huge biodiversity loss, by high rates of malnutrition, undernutrition as well as overnutrition, by increasing climate change and related effects of that, and land degradation. Now, all these challenges are connected, and agrobiodiversity can contribute to multiple sustainability goals across the food system, addressing several of these challenges simultaneously. Agrobiodiversity contributes in consumption to healthy and sustainable diets, contributes in markets to better livelihoods and growing economies, and contributes in production to more sustainable agriculture and ecosystem services, and also in genetic resource management to better managing our current and future options. And how agrobiodiversity contributes to these multiple sustainability goals throughout the food system is also linked to how it contributes to different SDGs, as is noted here. In addition, agrobiodiversity contributes to risk mitigation across different actors of the food system, and this is linked to these sustainability goals. We have done a demand assessment across different players in the food system, and we have documented strong demand and recognition of several risks and opportunities among farmers, consumers, food and agribusinesses, governments, and this common interest of how agrobiodiversity can help mitigate risks also resonates with the finance investors. And when we look into this a bit more, you can see that these different actors face slightly different risks related to low agrobiodiversity. But for example, an example is farmers, if they are only reliant or only dependent on one species or one variety, it can be hit hard when there is a certain pest or disease for which this variety or species is not resistant. Food and agribusinesses, and this particularly also is perhaps of interest to the audience of this webinar. We were honestly also surprised ourselves of their high interest in this, and this is because they expressed that it's not only a reputational risk, which is also very important related to their impact on the environment and health, but it also sits at the core of their operational risks and their supply chain, as well as it holds opportunities for innovation, for brand building, and reporting to sustainable development goals. This also links to interest from government at an operational as well as a reputational risk level, but also opportunities. And over time, also the scientific evidence that documents how agrobiodiversity contributes to these sustainability goals and mitigates these several risks has also been increasingly documented. This has been summarized in this book on both mainstreaming agrobiodiversity in sustainable food systems, and it has also triggered that agrobiodiversity is part of many and increasingly very multi-sectoral approaches that are published and documented in high impact journals, and also in the popular press. Now, to manage agrobiodiversity, we need to measure it. And there are several indicators that were capturing agrobiodiversity, but nothing had brought it together for these multiple dimensions and how agrobiodiversity contributes to these multiple actors and to these multiple dimensions in the food system. So there is where we were triggered and we're building on the demand from these different actors to build an agrobiodiversity index that can help unlock the potential of agrobiodiversity to contribute to these sustainability goals as well as the risk mitigation, and that can engage multiple actors in the food system that expressed and were increasingly expressing their demand for this. We have then also used this demand and what different stakeholders want to get out of this index into the design of the index. So we have assessed the interest and the demand from a diversity of organizations, corporate organizations, as well as investors, as well as various knowledge and data partners, as well as governmental and intergovernmental organizations, and also civil society and conservation groups. And we have done this to make the index as actionable as possible, and also to make it a dynamic index that can help engage these different actors. We have 8 principles that feed into the design and that shape the design, that were also shaped together with these different stakeholders. And several of these are relatively straightforward for indices, but I want to highlight shortly 3 of them. One is that it's scientific evidence-based, so we have a strong connection with different knowledge and scientific partners, and this is also a first summary that captured the scientific evidence on agrobiodiversity and sustainable food systems. Second, it's complementary. So we are working with other index groups, with other knowledge groups to make sure that what we are doing builds upon other efforts and adds to other efforts also. And we have done first a review also of other indices, and we've designed it also. And I mean, it's quite clear, and we feel confident that the Agrobiodiversity Index fills a niche that has not been filled before, and it has also opened many new partnerships, for example, with the World Benchmarking Alliance that engages private companies also on other indices, with the Biodiversity Indicator partnerships, the European Business and Biodiversity Platform, and where we collaborate and make our index complementary to the others so that they can be used together or individually. And the third is that it focuses on contribution, because we explore what can different actors contribute and how can to better management of agrobiodiversity across the food system. We recognize that it's not only one player, but that the public and the private sector together play an important role in managing that, and that the farmers and the consumers are also very important and central to what happens on the ground. And how can governments and food and agri businesses empower the consumers and farmers also in this effort? Based on these design principles and the input from these different actors, we've come to an initial methodology which has 3 categories of measurement: commitment, actions, and status. Commitment brings together different text for companies as well as countries, of policies, strategies, and legislations, and there is a script that mines this text for commitment of how agrobiodiversity is managed for multiple goals, and what the level of that commitment is. Second, actions. It brings together different spatial data sets, and it searches also for evidence of the commitment, or of evidence of a list of actions that supports agrobiodiversity for food and agriculture and for these multiple sustainability goals and risk mitigation goals, based on these spatial data sets, some of which are publicly available, some are found or provided in country reports or company reports. And then we check also if there are other documents available that perhaps we didn't have access to. And then third, the status. This also brings together several existing spatial data sets for the first time from a diversity perspective, like, for example, the species diversity in production. It's the first time that data is brought together from a diversity perspective, also information about ingredients, etc. So across these 3 categories of measurements, we try to use as much as possible data and information that is already out there, and then for specific gaps, we look for other solutions. Then, in addition to, we have 3 categories of measurements, and we have 3 pillars of the Agrobiodiversity Index, where agrobiodiversity contributes to sustainability in market and consumption, in production, and in genetic resource management. And this links to this food systems thinking and to these different SDGs of how agrobiodiversity can contribute to sustainability. On top of that, we have 6 areas of risk where agrobiodiversity can contribute to risk mitigation and is also linked to these different sustainable development goals. Feeding into that, we have an indicator framework that feeds into these different pillars. I will not go in detail in the indicator framework now. If people are interested in it, we are happy to do so. But so we have 15 status indicators, 5 action indicators, 3 commitment indicators, and you can see it from the 3 pillars, or you can see it across these 6 areas of risks and how these indicators feed into these different sustainability areas or these different risk mitigation areas. All this information is brought together in the Agrobiodiversity Index portal, which is available online. At the moment, it's still password protected, but we will open it later on, as we are still fine-tuning things for the first release. So it brings these data together in the Agrobiodiversity Index, allowing 4 main applications of outputs at the first level. So one is the risk and opportunity assessment. The other is the global policy alignment, aligning with the Sustainable Development Goals and the Aichi targets, a ranking and benchmarking, and an intervention planning. And Fred will also explain then later how these different applications link also to the financial tools and applications. But here I want to give you first a concrete example of a country and of a company project. So these are initial results from Peru. In the portal, we currently have 20 countries assessed. Peru was one of our pioneering countries where we where we are also going back and forward on the results and what they mean for them and what new type of insights they see using this index. So here I want to walk you through these results. Here, this is the status results, and this is the commitment and actions. We were strongly recommended by the private sector as well as by the public sector to report on those separately. So status on one hand, commitment and action on the other hand. And so we call this the progress score, and this is the status score. You see here that, and these are the 3 pillars. So the diets pillar, the sustainable production pillar, and genetic resource pillar. And these 3 pillars you find in the status, in the commitment, and in the actions. Some of the main messages here are that we see high levels of agrobiodiversity, particularly in markets and consumption, so and in the genetic resources, compared to the potential. In pillar 2, in the production pillar, there is still the level is still very much under the potential, so the maximum score is 100. What we see here also is that in commitment and action, there is the overall scores are much lower. What we see here is that Peru is actually a country that is very rich in agrobiodiversity, but the commitment and actions that are currently in place, they contribute a bit to using this agrobiodiversity and safeguarding it in order to contribute to these sustainability goals. But there is still a lot of potential and opportunity to use that agrobiodiversity and safeguard it much more and much better than is currently being done. So there's still a lot of potential to further use that agrobiodiversity and manage it better in order to contribute to the sustainability goals of more sustainable agriculture, more healthy diets, and making more current and future options available. So that is from kind of the overall scores. You can also look at it from a risk assessment score for these different risks areas. And therefore, you see here also the status, the actions, and the commitment. And you see, for example, that in status, there are no red flags, but a couple of orange flags. And here, but on actions, there are a couple of red flags that really kind of call attention, and that might flag a risk where there's chance to lose agrobiodiversity, or to really not use it at the level that it contributes to these risks areas. And so I will not go into too much detail. It's just to give an idea of different things that we do with the index and with the different components of the index. It shows here that across these, the highest risk here is for losses to pests and diseases related to relevant low agrobiodiversity and related actions and commitment. and that there is also an opportunity to utilize agrobiodiversity to help address malnutrition and poverty, as it's very higher in the status, but the actions and commitment actually to mobilize it and use it further is still relatively low, and there are many orange flags. So this is also just an initial showcase of how we can use this data, and I also want to emphasize that it's an iterative process of the methodology, and there's still a lot of room for improvement as well. But so we have for Peru the score with across the different pillars, the risk mitigation. Then you can also rank and compare to other countries and analyze why these other countries are higher for this or lower for this. And there's also the possibility to do intervention planning, to go deeper, for example, in one of the indicators or in the overall index, to see if we invest in a specific project or intervention, what is the expected or estimated impact on agrobiodiversity and the related benefits of agrobiodiversity. So here we have, this is an example of the effect of different intensification scenarios on pollinator diversity in a specific area of Peru. So this is an example of a country. Then we do similar approaches for companies. The structure is the same, as well as the indicator framework, as well as the risk assessment framework, but the type of data sometimes differs that feeds into that, as well as the scale. So for companies, we have been working mainly through the level of brands or specific projects. For example, this is an example of a company, but we are not showing the name because of confidentiality, where you can look at the overall scores for status and action and commitment, performance per pillar, and also similar for different contributors by indicators, and you can apply the same applications to the company. So this to give you an idea of the different potential applications and why companies as well as countries have expressed their interest in this. And with this, I would like to give the word to Fred, he will explain further how these applications can be used further to link to financial tools and products. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Rosalind. I guess you guys can see my screen. Let me, sorry, I just put on full screen mode. True. So I assume that everything is okay.
No, Fred, we can't see your screen for now. So maybe you should you need to click on the icon that looks like a TV, or accept the message you just received.
Oh yes, I did. Yep, it says to me that I'm showing screen.
Okay.
My monitor is green.
Okay, it seems some people can see the screen, so
let me do it again.
Oh, no.
Is that okay?
Yeah, it works.
Okay, super. Sorry for the technical glitch. So yes, thanks a lot, Rosalind. And Rosalind and her team have done an amazing work on developing the methodology and bringing the index to like what it is today. And we at Clark Mondial have helped them with just a bit of guidance on how to make that in a way that it can be used for finance, for financial instruments, for grants, for pay for success, like any kind of funding that can be related to agrobiodiversity. So just what is the status quo? Like, what do we hear? What have we researched? Like, what do we know about finance in agrobiodiversity? Well, unfortunately, it's not really a topic. And most of the approach, most of what we see today is about not harming wild biodiversity, is on reducing your negative externalities, like what you're doing to tigers and pandas and now plastics in the ocean. So, but as we tried to see, okay, what kind of investments, what's the level of investment going into agriculture, into food security, and then into agrobiodiversity, it gets more and more difficult to find data and to get people who actually understand what it means and how to do that. So most of what I have found is donor incentivized climate mitigation interventions. So it's climate mitigation, climate adaptation, climate change is still a big topic, and it should be, of course. And investments in agriculture have the classic problems, like the typical, like lack of collateral, so like lack of security, high transaction costs, high opportunity costs as well, and they are perceived as high risk. A lot of it due to a lack of understanding. It's easier to explain. It's easier for most people in finance to see, okay, there is an iPhone in a production line, even if it's in China, but there's a factory, it's on a controlled environment. It's not out there in the weather with a smallholder farmer, typically in emerging markets. So, linked to that, one problem that we're trying to solve now with the ABD Index is how to, and that has been a barrier for us and a question we're typically asked, through this methodology, this analysis that Rosaline has presented, what is material to corporates and governments? This materiality aspect, like why is it relevant, to which point that represents operational risk, that represents reputational risk to my business or to my government. So just a bit, as I mentioned, like we were looking into data, and like natural capital accounting is progressing. There are lots of papers. There is a good understanding today of the link between biodiversity investments and the economic benefit that they bring. The World Bank, for example, quotes that, okay, then into agriculture, that there is a 2 to 4 times effectiveness on agricultural development in raising incomes of low-income population. And but however, like despite of this clear need, there are still very few investments, and that's not so surprising. Like when Rosaline and I went to a couple of banks here in Switzerland, like 2 of the biggest ones, they knew about ESG. Maybe they could not spell the E and the S. Like they know governance well, social, it's getting there, environmental, not really. They can talk to a certain level about the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Aichi targets, they have never heard of. So there's still a lot of education. You still have to give that information to them and train that audience. So, and this is one thing that, looking into carbon credits, what carbon credits did, now what like green bonds and other types of financial instruments are doing, like green finance is doing, I think that's helping to build the market. So I found some numbers, for example, but like there is the annual investment, public and private, in agriculture and tackling hunger is something around like $220 billion per year. But then when I checked that, it was a World Bank and UN report dated 2014. Then I found an FAO report also talking about investments in agriculture, highlighting the importance of smallholders, but that was from 2012. Probably some people in the audience, some of the participants of this webinar, have more recent figures and have been working on that and trying to tackle that issue. But it's difficult to put numbers, like there are clear numbers around what is the need. You can see that it's like billions, if not trillions, that is needed to help those, especially smallholder farmers, emerging market governments on how to tackle the climate change threat. And here coming to the pressure forces on this slide, like the climate change threats to the agriculture production that they depend so much on, especially on exports and local food security. And but this is but you don't find much data on actual investments. But I think that's slowly changing, and those novel approaches, I just mentioned green bonds, the Climate Bond Initiative every year publishes a report about the state of the market, and the last one that was published just now in September identifies a universe of like $1.5 trillion, but out of that, only 3% were allocated to land use. And that hopefully will help, because they have just published the AFOLU standards. So you may have now more guidance, and then you may have more green bonds related to forest and land use. But yeah, I hope that that will come. That would help our work quite a lot. One thing interesting on that report was that almost half of those AFOLU-linked green bonds were in the 5 to 10 year bracket. And this is, I think, what is needed to change practice in agriculture. So I think that was like a good signal, and we need that market that has been growing every year over the last 5 years to keep on growing to address the issues that we have. Another point is blended finance. I imagine you guys have heard about it. Otherwise, yeah, just raise your hands and put a question in the end. Convergence, which is blended finance platform created by the Canadian government and some private foundations. They also have like incredible database. They have listed, I just lost the number, but they see that there are like over, yes, like 200 billion in assets under management on impact investments, and that has a lot to do with blended finance. And if you see, most of this blended finance has gone into the like provision of financial services, financial inclusion, a small part of it into agriculture, and a lot of what they label as agriculture has been on agriculture finance. But coming back to my previous comments about it is smallholders that do a lot of this work, that invest in their own farms. This is, that's a good signal that microfinance, local cooperatives, the supply chains of the big international companies, there's more funding available to them, and that should help drive, I'm hoping, more agrobiodiversity, especially if we can manage to highlight the topic, to measure it, and to show that it has a material effect. So what we're trying to do here, as I mentioned, is, as like Rosaline also explained, is that there is today a simplification of our resources. There is like risk and volatility, a lot of it linked to climate change. You have those shocks, but with ABD aligned products or more public knowledge about that, more consumer pressure, and the availability of financial instruments to finance agrobiodiversity, and that materiality of the impact and its importance being reflected into the management decision and of corporates and with like policymakers, I think that should help us to diversify the production and make us more like climate smart and help with food security. But I think Rosaline has already touched quite well on that topic. So I'm coming back here a bit more to my comfort zone to talk about the financial applications of the index. What we are doing here, Rosaline explained the methodology. We have country data, intervention data, and corporate data. Some of this corporate data is public, some of that is private that the companies are providing to us. And we are using that to make two types of assessments. One on the green column, which is estimating the impact of agrobiodiversity. This is scenario analysis. This is like if then. So if you have a certain policy, if a government wants to pursue a certain direction, what is going to be the impact on agrobiodiversity of that country? Is it contributing to food security? Is it making it safer? So we can assess that impact, and we can see, for example, in the case of Peru, certain policies, certain action, would it contribute to more green flags, more red flags? How much would that change? What would be the impact? So it's trying to quantify that, and similar to companies as well, so to help them with supply chain management. Another thing that we can do is, now coming to the orange column, is continuous periodic assessment of companies and countries. And that will help us review every quarter, 6 months, every year. We are discussing that, how often that should be, how countries would score or how companies would score. And through that, we can have investment funds, we can have other instruments that are used to finance interventions. So in one case, it's project specific, in other cases on an ongoing basis. So to try to be a bit more concrete, estimating the ABD impact, you have a scenario analysis that can be used for funding, for policy, for management decision making, and that then can serve as the key supporting criteria for specific, like, project-based financing. So that can be green bonds, that can be environmental bonds, impact bonds, grants. So let's say for a green bond, most of the green bonds, the green aspect is the use of the funds. So when a government, like many municipalities in the US, some countries go on and try to issue a green bond, they say, the monies that I'm raising with this bond, the resources, I'm going to use in this manner. Those are the interventions that I'm going to finance. And those interventions, they are green, according to, usually you have a third-party verification, and the criteria to define if it's green or not, or how green it is. The Agrobiodiversity Index can be that criteria. It could serve for that, to say that, yes, we expect it to contribute in this manner, or it can serve as a target for performance-based, like results-based finance, to say that today that's the score. If you do this intervention, we expect the new score to be at that level. That's our target. In a few years, I'm going to go there, measure it again, and see if it has delivered or not on its promises. So this is, I think, a very strong, very important use of the index. Another one that we are also talking to some banks and pension funds and insurance companies is the periodic assessment. This, we are talking today more for listed companies and national governments, but it is also going to be available on a sub-national analysis in case you need for municipal bonds or like other regional approaches. And here, there are two big uses of it. It's risk management and portfolio management. And risk management, especially going beyond what we see today with wild biodiversity, is going into supply chain risk. It's going into export issues. It's going, like in current account balance of countries. It's going into like food security of the country. So when those points become material, and portfolio management is, you can have a fund that allocates its portfolio across different, say, even normal bonds, normal loans of countries, but it does that also with an ABD angle, also saying that, okay, I'm gonna buy a little bit more of this country and a little bit less of that other country, because I think that from a food security perspective, from an agrobiodiversity perspective, like this country is more stable. Therefore, it should have more like positive growth, like more sustainable growth. So that should be a better risk return profile. So this can be used for like negative filters. So like as an exclusion criteria, I'm not going to invest in countries or in companies that score below X, or it's a positive criteria as an allocation factor that I just explained. And this can be a filter for development assistance, listed equities, normal bonds. So we are really exploring here all types of financial mechanisms, and we think that it is something that can be combined with Bioversity's capacity to deliver advice and consulting work, especially to governments, and to see, okay, like what is the impact? What are the target interventions? Can we use the index also to finance those proposed interventions? And the answer in all cases we have checked so far is that like, yes, we can. So I think on that point, I think we managed to do that in a very, very flexible way that suits all those instruments. And well, I think it has pushed the scientific team behind it, like Rosalind and her team, quite a bit, and to say, you know, like, do we have the data? Can we calculate those things? Is that really available? And I think the methodology is strong enough that would hold for applications like that. So I think, yeah, we would like to leave some time for the Q&A. Just to highlight that it has been a collaborative approach. Some companies like Syngenta, Nestle, Sainsbury's, some countries, also Peru, that Rosalind has shown the example. Also India, Ethiopia have also contributed to that. The Italian government, we are also very grateful for their support as a funding partner, and also the European Commission has also been instrumental, like among other funders of Bioversity. Also some data knowledge partners. You have the names on your screen. Those have helped us a lot with workshops and providing inputs. I think the methodology book, I think Rosalind can add to that. One chance to the first question is about to be published, and that's going to provide more detail as well. So we just want to say thank you to our partners. Some of them might be on the line. And we'd like to invite you guys to help us test and pilot the index. And this is really an active invitation. Like, please reach out to us. It would be great. It would really help us to develop the index if we have more countries and more companies. And there's limited budget, so if you can help with budget, that's also good. But yes, to test and pilot the index, we are always looking for volunteers. And here are some names, I think on the left side, more on the scientific research and methodology development. On the right side, on the management and corporate development of the index. Giampiero and Chiara helped us organize this workshop, and they also deal with partnerships. So also please reach out to them if you would like to be part of this pilot assessment. So on that note, a big thank you to everybody. I hope I have not forgotten anything important, but if so, you can always add on the Q&A.